Canada versus Mexico, two nations, two strategies, and one unpredictable trade war. As trade tensions once again flare up across North America, Canada and Mexico are showing the world two very different ways to confront a common challenge: Donald Trump's revived tariff campaign. While Mexico remains measured and discreet, Canada is taking a bold, public stand, and the contrast is revealing. It all began when the Trump administration announced a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from Canada, reigniting one of the most controversial chapters of the Trump-era trade wars. But unlike previous years, Canada's response in 2025 came swiftly and without hesitation. Under the leadership of newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney, the message was clear: this time, Ottawa wouldn't play defense. Just days after the announcement, Ontario Premier Doug Ford held a press conference, declaring that the province would impose its own 25% tariff, this time on electricity exported to the United States. The move wasn't symbolic. U.S. states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota rely heavily on Canadian energy, and the sudden surcharge triggered alarm in Washington. Ford said bluntly, "You tax our steel, we'll tax your power." According to U.S. Department of Commerce figures, Canadian steel exports had already declined by billions during the previous round of tariffs in 2018. But now, Canada was hitting back where it hurt, in areas of real economic leverage. The result? U.S. trade officials were forced into emergency talks with the Ontario government, marking a shift in power dynamics rarely seen in cross-border relations. Prime Minister Carney, a former central banker with a global reputation, didn't mince words. "We will not be intimidated," he said during a televised address. "If the United States wants a partner, we're ready. But if they want a punching bag, we are not it." His approval ratings soared as Canadians across the political spectrum rallied behind the tough tone. Carney's approach signaled a dramatic departure from the more restrained style of his predecessors. Meanwhile, just south of the border, Mexico was choosing a different path. President Claudia Sheinbaum, who succeeded Andrés Manuel López Obrador, continued the tradition of diplomatic quiet. Instead of counter-tariffs or public rebukes, Mexico opted for closed-door negotiations, trying to de-escalate tensions without inflaming nationalist rhetoric on either side. Insiders in Mexico City reported that the government was working on Plan B, a strategy to shield key sectors from U.S. pressure while avoiding direct confrontation. The approach preserved trade flows, particularly in agriculture and auto parts, but also drew criticism from those who felt it lacked strength. In contrast to Canada's vocal defiance, Mexico's silence seemed almost passive. Still, the results were mixed. According to the World Trade Organization, Mexico managed to maintain stable trade figures with the U.S. through early 2025, even as Canada's exports dipped and tensions rose. But stability came at a cost, a perception that Mexico was unwilling to challenge unfair practices head-on. For Carney, that was unacceptable. "Silence is not a strategy," he told European leaders at an economic summit in Brussels. "It's an invitation to be ignored." His remarks drew global attention and positioned Canada as a nation willing to confront U.S. unpredictability with both strength and clarity. Doug Ford, too, found himself at the center of the fight. As the most populous province, Ontario had long been America's largest energy supplier. By turning the switch on tariffs, Ford wasn't just reacting, he was forcing Washington to consider the consequences of its own economic aggression. The pressure worked. Within weeks, U.S. negotiators returned to the table, more cautious and less combative. The question now: whose approach will prove more effective in the long run? While Canada's hardline stance earns respect and forces negotiations, Mexico's diplomacy keeps markets steady and relations intact. Trump, however, remains defiant. In recent speeches, he dismissed inflation warnings, mocked foreign leaders, and doubled down on the need for economic control. But back home, the numbers tell another story. According to Chief Executive Magazine, CEO confidence in the U.S. is at its lowest since 2012. A recent survey of 220 top business leaders revealed rising concern over unstable trade policies, declining investment, and the lack of long-term vision from Washington. Even conservative media, once reliably pro-Trump, is starting to turn. The Wall Street Journal called his latest tariff moves the most reckless trade blunder of the decade, while outlets like Bloomberg and CNBC are publishing op-eds questioning whether the U.S. is isolating itself from its closest partners. Behind the headlines, one truth is emerging: in this trade war, silence may buy time, but defiance is reshaping the narrative. Canada has made it clear, respect isn't given, it's demanded. And as this conflict deepens, it's becoming a test of not just policy, but national identity. As warning signs of a potential recession begin flashing red, business leaders across the country are raising their voices, not with optimism, but with growing alarm. CEOs, economists, and investors are urging the U.S. government to take immediate action before the economic slowdown spirals into a full-blown collapse. But while economic indicators plummet, the focus inside the political sphere seems dangerously misplaced. Rather than presenting a coherent economic recovery plan, former President Donald Trump has doubled down on his online presence, spending hours daily on his social media platform, Truth Social. Instead of addressing inflation, supply chain challenges, or declining investor confidence, Trump has been using the platform to comment on everything from Elon Musk to paper straws. The disconnect is becoming harder to ignore. In a recent poll conducted in Michigan, one of the key swing states in the upcoming election, nearly 70% of respondents expressed disapproval of Trump's current priorities. A former White House economic advisor noted that the expectation was for Trump to focus on pressing issues like job creation, tax reform, and cost of living solutions. But what we're seeing is a constant stream of distractions, the advisor said. And that's creating real anxiety among both voters and business leaders. One of the most controversial proposals currently under discussion involves potential cuts to Social Security infrastructure. Specifically, the Trump team has floated the idea of shutting down regional Social Security call centers, a move critics warn would leave millions of seniors without easy access to their benefits. A report from the Social Security Administration cautions that reducing service access, or worse, partially privatizing the system, could increase healthcare burdens and deepen inequality. Analysts warn that if Social Security is handed over to private financial institutions, it could lead to significant instability. Wall Street might benefit, but average Americans would be left vulnerable. It's a bait-and-switch, said one policy expert. You promise modernization, but what you deliver is risk for the most financially fragile Americans. At the same time, while economic pressures mount, the administration has chosen to take a bizarre public stance against paper straws. Backed by Trump and several Justice Department officials, there's now a push to reverse local bans and promote the return of plastic straws, citing consumer inconvenience. The announcement has drawn backlash from environmental groups, who argue that the sudden focus on such a trivial issue is an intentional distraction from failing economic metrics. Meanwhile, immigration policy took a startling turn when Trump publicly suggested that undocumented immigrants, even those with no criminal record, be detained at Guantanamo Bay. Citing national security, the proposal drew immediate outrage. But reports soon emerged that none of the individuals targeted were considered threats. Within weeks, many were quietly released. The entire episode was labeled a PR disaster by both sides of the aisle. Despite these mounting controversies, Trump's inner circle continues to defend his economic record. Supporters argue that tariff pressure and regulatory rollbacks are part of a long-term plan to restore American manufacturing and reduce foreign dependence. But data from the Federal Reserve and other economic bodies paint a different picture. In early 2025, U.S. GDP is projected to contract by up to 3%, a downturn not seen since the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. Adding fuel to the fire, the administration recently announced a shocking new tariff, a 50% import tax on all goods coming from Canada. But what truly stunned international observers was the attached condition that Canada would only be granted relief from the tariff if it agreed to become the 51st U.S. state. Economists were quick to slam the proposal as reckless. Canada is not only America's top trading partner, accounting for $793 billion in bilateral trade in 2023, but also a critical source of energy and materials. Over 75% of Canadian exports are destined for the U.S., including 50% of America's crude oil imports and nearly 60% of its aluminum. Any disruption in that flow could trigger a chain reaction: higher gas prices, construction delays, and increased costs for everything from home appliances to consumer electronics. Early inflation estimates suggest that the tariff alone could raise U.S. inflation by more than 1%, a sharp spike in an already strained economy. As tensions rise, global investors are watching closely. Markets are reacting not only to policy shifts, but to the broader concern that political decisions are being made for spectacle, not strategy. One former Canadian trade official put it bluntly: if this is how the U.S. treats its closest ally, what message does it send to the rest of the world? And as Americans face job losses, higher prices, and shrinking benefits, the real question may not be what comes next, but how much more the country can take before something finally breaks. In early 2025, a controversial new trade policy sent shockwaves through global markets: a 50% tariff on all Canadian imports. Financial analysts, business leaders, and economists wasted no time sounding the alarm. Within hours of the announcement, CNBC's senior economist Steve Leisman appeared live on air, calling the policy economically reckless and strategically incoherent. According to him, the U.S. had no roadmap, just reactionary policies driven by short-term politics, not long-term national interest. Markets responded with immediate volatility. The S&P 500 dropped 2.1% in a single trading day, one of the steepest one-day losses in recent months. The Canadian dollar plunged 4.3%, triggering inflation fears north of the border. Major U.S. corporations with deep supply chain ties to Canada saw their stock prices tumble. Boeing, FedEx, and General Motors fell between 3% and 5%, revealing deep investor concern over disruptions in manufacturing and logistics. Technology and automotive industries were among the hardest hit. Both Apple and Tesla warned that increased costs on Canadian-sourced components would slow down production, disrupt delivery schedules, and raise retail prices for consumers. According to internal forecasts, Ford and GM may be forced to raise vehicle prices by $2,500 to $4,000 per unit if the tariffs continue, a move that could shrink domestic demand and damage consumer confidence. Observers were left asking, did anyone in Washington fully consider the economic cost of this escalation? Canadian leaders certainly didn't wait to find out. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued an immediate and forceful response, stating, "Canada's sovereignty is not a bargaining chip. We are not for sale, and we never will be." Ontario Premier Doug Ford added that U.S. businesses were privately panicked about the tariffs but hesitant to speak publicly due to political pressure. "Canada will not be intimidated," he said. "We're prepared to respond, and we will." In response, Canada began drafting a list of retaliatory tariffs targeting key sectors of the U.S. economy, including agriculture, steel, and technology. Experts warn that U.S. food prices could surge by 8 to 12% if these retaliations go into effect, with direct consequences for millions of American families already struggling with inflation. Even within the U.S., backlash erupted almost instantly. Several Republican lawmakers, traditionally aligned with Trump's economic policies, expressed concern that damaging America's most stable trading relationship could backfire, weakening industries from farming to aerospace, and jeopardizing international trust built over decades. CEOs from Walmart, Amazon, and Tesla reportedly lobbied against the policy behind closed doors, warning that higher prices would hit consumers hard and reduce household spending. Financial analyst Jim Cramer went even further, stating on national television that a trade war with Canada won't strengthen America, it'll sink it. Some manufacturers are already exploring plans to relocate production outside the U.S. in order to avoid unpredictable tariffs and protect their global operations. If that happens, job losses in the U.S. could rise sharply, compounding the damage. So the question remains, is this policy a show of strength, or the beginning of a major economic breakdown? While the White House maintains that the move is part of a larger effort to rebalance trade, critics point to deeper consequences. Global confidence in U.S. economic leadership is eroding. Key trading partners are forming new alliances. And the American economy is starting to show cracks, from slowed growth to increasing market volatility. Even conservative media, often unwavering in support of Trump, is now split. While some networks double down on defending the tariff policy, others are quietly beginning to question its logic. But one network remains consistent: Fox News. Despite the overwhelming economic fallout, Fox has continued to back Trump's approach, often spinning developments to portray Canada as submissive and U.S. actions as heroic. But the reality tells another story. Canada has not bowed to American pressure. In fact, the current standoff has only made Canadian leadership more vocal, more assertive, and more determined to protect national interests. Trade officials from Ottawa have publicly refuted claims made on conservative U.S. broadcasts, pointing to ongoing negotiations as evidence of Canada's refusal to concede. Fox News anchors have repeatedly dismissed concerns over inflation and job losses, insisting that the economy is resilient and that tariffs are a necessary sacrifice. But data suggests otherwise. According to the Federal Reserve, U.S. GDP is expected to contract by up to 3% in the coming quarter, with consumer spending down, business investment declining, and investor confidence at its lowest since the 2020 recession. A Harvard University study from 2022 found that Trump's earlier tariff policies cost American consumers nearly $8 billion in a single year, and the trend is repeating itself. While early unemployment figures remain stable, the threat of mass layoffs is growing as manufacturers delay hiring and cut expansion plans. Meanwhile, Fox continues to push its narrative. Anchors speak of creative strategy and economic disruption with purpose. They suggest that the tariffs are part of a master plan to restore American dominance. But behind the curtain, it's clear, what's unfolding is less about strategy and more about damage control. Whether this is the start of a new chapter or the final act of a failing economic script remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the fallout from this policy is only just beginning. As the United States enters deeper into economic and political turbulence, one media network continues to play a unique role in shaping public perception: Fox News. Throughout Trump's most turbulent years, the network has acted as both amplifier and defender, often downplaying facts that contradict its chosen narrative. Commentators like Laura Ingraham even question whether constitutional rights should apply to non-citizens, clashing with core American values. But as social platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook provide broader access to real-time information, public awareness is shifting. The old tactics of narrative control are weakening, and fast. Meanwhile, the U.S.-Canada relationship is hitting historic lows. When Trump raised tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum from 25% to 50%, Canada responded immediately. Ontario slapped a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to U.S. states like New York and Michigan, impacting 1.5 million households. Trump's response: further threats. Washington warned that Canadian auto imports could be next unless trade barriers were lifted. But Canada didn't flinch. Instead, provinces took aggressive steps. British Columbia imposed tolls on U.S. trucks en route to Alaska. Nova Scotia banned U.S. firms from public contracts. Alberta promised further retaliation. Manitoba and Newfoundland removed U.S. goods from state-run stores. The ripple effects hit hard. U.S. freight operations saw major disruption. Companies like Amazon and Tesla raised concerns about supply chains and consumer prices. The S&P 500 dropped 0.8% in a single day, with major steel, aluminum, and auto stocks tumbling. Analysts warned that car prices could surge due to rising production costs. But Canada wasn't just defending itself, it was reorienting. Trade talks with Europe, Asia, and Latin America accelerated. The goal: reduce dependency on U.S. markets and find new global partners. This wasn't reaction, it was strategy. Despite economic fallout, Fox News continued to support Trump's approach. Hosts framed Canadian retaliation as proof of U.S. dominance. Some even claimed that Canada had no choice but to obey. But the facts said otherwise. Far from surrendering, Canada had taken a firm, coordinated stand. Now, the world is watching. Global investors are unsettled. U.S. industries face mounting costs. Public trust and leadership is eroding. This isn't just about tariffs, it's about how power is used, how truth is shaped, and how alliances are tested. The US and Canada may one day repair this rift, but the damage is already being felt. And the next chapter of this economic conflict is only just beginning. Stay tuned, because what happens next could redefine the future of global trade.